Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Morgan. I'm so happy to have you here. Today I'm doing something a little different in honor of my birthday, and I'm posting this on my birthday. I thought I would use this as an opportunity to kind of introduce myself a little bit and give a little more context behind some of the things that I like in books, don't like in books, kind of what I consider to be a good rating, as well as just like a little info on me. So I feel like it would be super weird to do my whole Morgan and Bookland intro little clip when it's an intro to more intro about me. I feel like that's intro inception. So we're just going to skip that part and we're going to go right into it. Also, I got the iPad mini so I can take notes because I don't know if you've seen in my earlier videos, I had these obnoxious notes that I was going through. So hopefully this helps not having rustling paper noises all the time. And it brings me joy. How Marie Kondo. Okay. Hi, I'm Morgan. I am an avid reader. I live in New Jersey with my husband, who is a massive, massive sports fan. He's the one who encouraged me to start my Bookstagram and my YouTube, my booktube channel here. He has been successfully doing podcasts for, over 10 years now that have to do with the Phillies. His podcast is Ring the Bell for the Phillies, the wrestling WWE. His podcast there is called The Hot Tag. He does one for the Eagles. I think it's called Gangrene. He's done one for the 49ers, and he's done a whole bunch of things. And he's kind of taught me and encouraged me to do this. So thank you, husband, Chris, but I like to make it fancy because why not? We all know, if you've watched my other videos, I can't pronounce names, so I'm going to give him a fancy name. He's not here to stop me, so Christopher has been so encouraging. So that's why I started this, because he knows I'm very passionate about the books and can only contribute so much to the conversation as a man who isn't a fan of fae and winged men. So I thought this would be fun to start those conversations here, because why not? Gives me a sounding board, right? So we have two girls. I loved reading when I was a kid. I know it's going to be so shocking to hear that Harry Potter is what taught me to love to read. I know, shocking. And I also am a huge avid film lover. My first job out of college was in film publicity and promotions. I did advanced film screenings for some of the major studios. I did talent appearances. I was also costume characters. One time, I don't know if any of you have seen the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movie, but it's about food that talks. And one time I was dressed up as a giant costume character, Pickle, and I got stuck in the giant pickle costume, and that was a nightmare. Another time I dressed up and was paid to be a Smurf at Six Flags, where the kids are. Now, I don't know if you know this about Smurfs. They have kind of like pointy, not really tails, but like pointy things in the back. So when the costume was put on me, it was put on backwards, so the pointy thing was in the front. I will never forget that. But yes, so I started out in film. I'm just like a huge fan of all things fantasy and just really intense plots. I'm a huge Marvel fan. I love Lord of the Rings. I love everything Harry Potter. I think action adventure movies are my favorite. I do love a good rom-com, don't get me wrong, but I feel that also kind of translates into my book reading. I didn't really get started with book reading again until 2021, I think. I don't know if it's just a coincidence with COVID where there wasn't a lot of stuff coming out, or the world just felt really depressing and it was really easy to escape into books. And I know this is going to be shocking. Well, actually, my first getting back into reading, in adulthood reading, the first books that I started reading were dystopian books that had to do with, I think The Selection was actually the first series that I read, getting back into reading, and then I read a lot of series following that. There's a series that I love called The Princess Trials. There's another series I love, I think it was called The Cure Chronicles, something like that. Either way, I've read a lot of dystopian fiction, which I absolutely love. One of my favorite books to read is dystopian fiction with a fantasy twist, and that can be really hard to find. But I love it when I find it. And then, of course, what got me into fantasy romance, again, none of you will believe it when I say ACOTAR. I know, shocking. And then from there, I read ACOTAR, and then the next, I did go from ACOTAR to From Blood and Ash, and then to Throne of Glass. I read Crescent City last, and I still haven't actually read Kingdom of the Wicked, which is a big one. I did read The Cruel Prince. That was actually one I'm not a fan of. I don't know if it's the tale. I think it's just the setting, and I'm not a fan of bully romances, so that's probably why I wasn't a big fan of that one. But anyway, I read about 100, 150, over the past couple years, I've read between 100 to 150 books, and I'm definitely on track for that again this year. I read almost exclusively at night because I have children and a job. My regular work is project management, operations management, and event planning, which is so fun. And yes, that is me in a nutshell. I think I hit all of my points. Okay, so I also wanted to kind of go over a couple. I thought it'd be fun to share like my must-read authors and like how I review things, as well as like some of this or that type of questions, as well as a book that I think everyone should read, and my favorite book so far of this year. So first of all, a good book to me is a 3.5 and above. I don't give out fives that much. I gave out a lot last year, and then I went back and I actually changed my rankings and lowered them because I realized I think it's really hard to get a 5. And so I think if I give a book a 3.5, to me, that's a really good rating. That's something that I enjoyed. Would I read it again? Maybe not. Is it super memorable? Maybe not. But is it something I would recommend? Yes. And is it something that I enjoyed? Yes. Once we get to 3s, and 3s are still like, oh, that was good. But once we get below, that's when it gets to be bad. But for me, a good book is like a 3.5. So I actually feel like I'm a lower rater than most people, but it's not, and so I have a hard time then sharing things on Instagram because I want to be positive there, and I don't want people to think if I give a 3.5 it's not good, because to me that is really good. To me it's really hard to get those 4s and 5s. Those are reserved for like the top. And if I give a book a 5, it's not, I also don't rate based on what does come into play is if it was actually good from an objective standpoint. Like, can I admit that this was a good book? Whether or not I personally liked it, yes. But for the most part, my rating also comes from me personally. And so some books that I have are 5s. I can recognize probably in the grand scheme of things, they're not like a Jane Austen novel or a Tolkien book kind of level, but I loved them, and they're the books that stick with me forever. And an example of that, I'll go into that right now. The book that I think everyone should read, and the series I think everyone should read, is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. Book 2, Ballad of Never After, is one of my favorite books of all time. This is magical themed, but it's not like fae. It's very whimsical. It's not a fairy tale retelling by any means, but it feels fairy tale-esque. It is so fun to read, and this book kind of destroyed me a little bit, and it's very hard for a book to do that. Stephanie Garber did an incredible job writing the angst and the longing, and then the confusion in terms of how we should feel about certain things, and then getting us to the ending, which I read this like a month after it came out, and then realized I had to wait a year for that cliffhanger. If you've read this, you know what the cliffhanger is, and you know the pain. But this is one of those books that I'm sure objectively isn't the greatest book of all time, but to me, it definitely is one of those. So highly recommend the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I will always praise this series. I will say book 3, if you've seen my other videos, I was super disappointed by it, but still enjoyed it. And book 1 is also, I thought it was so good, but this is like the bread and butter. So read book 1 so you can get to this, and then read book 3 so you can feel the pain relief of the cliffhanger of this book. So anyway, that is a series that everyone should read that to me is a 5, but I know objectively probably isn't across the board. And then I'll go on. My favorite book so far of 2024 is another non-fae book. It is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This was such a pleasure. It's magic. Like, it has kind of Regency era high society vibes, which is fun. So a little bit like Bridgerton, but super gothic. Kind of reminded me the feel of like Belladonna at times, but much better than Belladonna. And I loved the book Belladonna by Adeline Grace, if you know which one I'm talking about. This book I had put off reading for so long because it didn't look super enticing to me. And then I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. But it has to do with like card magic. And the big quote is, The Girl, the King, and the Monster They Became, which now is, of course, a sticker on my Kindle. So, highly recommend this book if you haven't read it. Best book of 2024 so far. Okay, then I thought it would be fun, more about me, because why not? It's my birthday today, and I'm celebrating. I thought it'd be fun to kind of talk about Sarah J. Maas and like my favorites. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about my favorite characters and of course the Shadow Daddies, because how could I not? So let's start with Akatar, of course. I love Nesta. I think it's because at one point I kind of felt like a Nesta, and I loved how you hated her at first and she was so obnoxious and you were so angry. But then I feel like when you got to her book, I thought Sarah J. Maas did a really good job humanizing her and making her feel more relatable than some of the other characters. Like, it's hard for me to relate to Feyre. She's 19, illiterate, becomes literate within like a month, defeats a giant worm and has all these like Fey men after her and like saves the world kind of situation. I can't really relate to that, but I can relate to Nesta and like the self-deprecation and the loathing and just the emotional turmoil she goes through. So I do really like Nesta because I really liked the evolution of her character and kind of going from hating her to understanding her to loving her. And I love Cassian as well. Cassian's my favorite male character in that series. Okay, Throne of Glass. I love Aelin. I know she's the lead. I feel like this is going to get some heat because a lot of people are like, no, Manon's the best. I love Manon, don't get me wrong. But Aelin's just so fun, and how she comes up with these schemes that carry through from like book one all the way to the end. I just find it so fun reading her and trying to like see how her brain put all this stuff together and created all these amazing things. I just feel like seeing her actions play out and you're like, what is she doing? And then you realize, oh crap, that's what she was doing. So fun to read. And then Lorcan. I really want to know what Lorcan did. It's a shame we'll never find out. But Lorcan was my favorite male character of that. I loved most of them. I really did like Dorian for sure. Like Manon and Dorian were probably my second favorite characters. But there's something about Lorcan. There's something about the villain. There's truly like the villain and the bad guy who has a redemption arc but still maintains that like morally gray and like roughness. That's not like, you know, it's not a true change. Like still maintains some of that personality throughout the character arc, and I feel like that was Lorcan, and I really enjoyed him. I also enjoyed his banter with a lead. That was super fun to read. So, Crescent City, the Hind, which is so funny because I call her the Hind, and I can't even remember what her real name is because I just call her the Hind. And then Rune. Like I think he is my favorite male character in the entire Sarah J. Maas universe so far, is Rune. I mean, I just think he's also the most underrated too. He's so fun to read. I also was so shocked by his character because when I first started the Crescent City, the first book, I was not expecting him to be a good guy. And then he kept proving me wrong on so many different levels, and he's great. Okay, so last but certainly not least, I thought it would be fun to go through some of my this or that's, and then we shall close. And my next video will be all about more books, but I did have books. I did have books in this video, and these are great books, so please read these. This or that. So when it comes to, I have high fantasy or urban fantasy. I prefer high fantasy. I get really distracted when the book takes place in modern day society. It kind of I think it's hard to do without it having a cheesy element to it. I think Crescent City does a really good job at that. But there are some books that don't do a good job at that. And it's kind of distracting, I feel like. It makes it hard for me to really get into it. I also really love new worlds and world building. And when a fantasy is rooted in reality, it's like, that's not as exciting. Like, you don't have to come up with anything. Like, I know where Paris is. That's not new. Okay. Vampires or fae, which is also, of course, like from Blood and Ash or Akatar, which I love from Blood and Ash. Except the last book, I've got issues with it. We can chat in the DMs. But I do prefer fae. I love a good vampire book, though, but I do tend to prefer the fae books. And actually my favorite, which is funny because it's definitely shown by the two books I showed, is just fantasy in general that doesn't rely on conventions that we typically associate with like fae or vampire shifters. I really enjoy when a reader is able to create a whole new world, including a magic system. It just seems like coming into it with a completely blank slate. I'm not relying on the knowledge that usually fae can't lie, like that kind of thing. And so those are my favorites ultimately. Standalone or series. So series, I like getting attached to characters, and I like when I like multiple plot points, and like, you know, I know like so many series, if there's like 5 books or something, there's usually a huge plot point that you're waiting for in book 3, and then you get to like the true villain or something, and then you get to book 5, and I just really enjoy staying with characters and seeing characters through it all. I think it can be really hard to have a standalone where you feel complete. But then sometimes there are some series where it's like, yeah, that probably should have only been 2 books. That definitely happens a lot. But ultimately, I do tend to prefer the series. Spice or no spice? This is a hard one because it's not about the spice. It's about, for me, if it's appropriate and if it belongs and if it adds something to the book. So I've definitely read some books where I'm like, this is a little, I feel like it's a little obnoxious at times. But I've read other books without it where I'm like, man, like, what did Lorcan do? That's like a perfect example where it's like, out of all the places where I would want it, that's where I would want it, kind of thing. So I don't mind it. I think it can be distracting, and I think it can be, I don't like it when it runs the book and it's a key point of it, but I certainly don't mind it. And when certain things aren't there, sometimes it can feel a little hard to believe. So even if it's closed door and we know things like, that's one thing. So I'm not really for it, against it. I'm more for, it has to be the right choice. And sometimes authors don't make the right choice, in my opinion. Okay, book or audiobook? I have yet to listen to an audiobook. I am a book through and through. I think I would get so distracted if the voices didn't line up with how I thought they should be and didn't have the inflections that I would put in my brain. And I think it would make me laugh. I think hearing it would make me laugh sometimes, especially listening to some of those scenes. You know which scenes I'm talking about. I feel like that would be hard for me as an audiobook, so I don't think I could ever do audiobooks. Physical book or Kindle, I read I read exclusively on my Kindle. I've only read one book as a physical book, and it was The Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber, because I got it at a book signing the day before it came out, so it wasn't available on my Kindle. And I read it from the time I got the book at like 6 p.m. I read it all the way, just all the way through in a sitting, essentially. So that was a late night. Woohoo. Thank goodness for coffee. But other than that, I'm a huge Kindle reader because my hands get sore, and I do have the Paperwhite version, so it's got like a little light. It just feels super fancy. And also I sometimes can be a mood reader, so having multiple books at once on one thing is nice. And since I do travel for work, it's nice because it's so light and it's easy. I can bring all my books with me in one. I'm excited. I just downloaded the Libby app, and I'm really excited to start exploring the library options. So that's fun. I do have Kindle Unlimited. I'm a huge fan of Kindle Unlimited. A lot of books that I love come from there, including some of my most loved authors, which is most like always must read authors, which is where I will end. So like a lot of people, I will always read a Sarah J. Maas book and a Jennifer Armentrout, if that's how you're saying it, book. Another author, which of course, as I talked about, is Stephanie Garber. She wrote the Caraval series, which, as you can see behind me, boop boop, and the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. She has a novella for Caraval coming out this year, which I'm excited about. But like I mentioned, her writing's just so whimsical and fun, and it's a unique magic system. So it's just a really fun read, I would say. You can't take it too seriously, and it is aimed more young adult. So you'll definitely see some things where it feels like it might feel incomplete or rushed, or maybe some plot holes. But it's still, her writing's just so enjoyable to read. Other authors, which are Kindle Unlimited authors for the most part, L.J. Andrews. She is exploding right now because she wrote The Ever King, followed by The Ever Queen. That is a very popular pirate romance Viking type of fae book out right now, which I do love. I started off, though, I did read her Cursed Kingdoms series, which is fabulous. The first one, A Curse of Thorns, and it's something, it's up there. Where is it? A Curse of Shadows and Thorns. That was the first one, and I loved it. It was so fun. It has one of my favorite characters of all time. I just love her writing, and I love her stories. Other authors, Ella Fields. She writes a lot of fantasy, and it's interesting because her books aren't always my favorite, but I really enjoy the stories. They're usually unique compared to some of the other plots that we see going out there, and they're usually a little gritty and a little darker, and I feel like while there's happy endings, like it's more true to real life in terms of some of the turmoil characters go through in like intense situations, as opposed to, it's not like, it's a war situation. No, it's like real life, like similar situations brought into books, if that makes sense. And there's something about it that makes it feel really more real, I would say, and just really well done. Again, it's weird. I oftentimes don't feel fully satisfied for her books because of the fact that that's how reality works, is it doesn't always work out perfectly. And while there are happy endings, it's really interesting how she gets you there. And so I highly recommend her books. One of the books that I read that really, one of her favorites that I read was, I think it's called Nectar of the Wicked. And then it's a duology, Nectar of the Wicked and Wrath of the Damned. The first one I did like better, but both enjoyable, again on the darker side, but highly recommend LJ Andrews and Ella Woods. Ella Woods, that's Elle Woods. It's not Ella Woods, is it? Is it Ella Woods? Things I should have prepared for. Where is this book? It's Ella Fields. See, now I've got like, what's that? I can't even think of it. Legally Blonde on the mind. It's Ella Fields and LJ Andrews. They are Kindle Unlimited authors. I also really like Lisette Marshall. She wrote a book called A Court of Blood and Bindings, and it's a series that just finished this year. I highly recommend it. She has another book called Curse of the Thorn King, which is like completely different, and it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, super fun. I enjoy her stuff as well. There's a lot of authors that I read, and so I'm probably forgetting a lot of them. But yes, there's a lot you can find on Kindle Unlimited. So thank you for hanging in there. It was so nice to meet you, even though it's just me ranting. But I'm so grateful for you taking the time to get to know me. Let me know if you have any questions. Drop your favorite books and all that kind of stuff. And I will see you in the next one.